to set.
Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Happy President's Day, my AKAPADers. So we're scrambling around here for presidential content. And last night, and I just feel like it was, oh my God, such a long time coming. But I put Oliver Stone's, he co-wrote it, he directed it. Anthony Hopkins, NIXON, 1995. And there's just a swell of emotion that comes through me as I'm watching this movie. And some of it is, and guys, we're getting right into it, but happy President's Day. Welcome back to the podcast. Peter A. DeLuca here, AKAPAD. You know me as the film buff. Cause, well, it's simple. I just love talking about movies. I just do it. Yeah. I know you do too. And maybe you out there, you love hearing talk about movies. Yeah, and there's a couple areas to breach when we talk about NIXON, the movie. Number one, this movie was hyped. This movie had a excitable atmosphere. Anthony Hopkins, Richard Nixon. At this point in media, so since this movie, there's been a lot of Richard Nixon films. Richard Nixon right now, we might say, next to Abraham Lincoln, is the most portrayed president that we have. Up until this point, though, we really haven't had a lot of Richard Nixon outside of comedy skits and Point Break, The Mask, right? The Brody Mask. So this was finally we get a serious film about Richard Nixon. Serious cast. I mean, guys, everyone in this movie is amazing. And then this other area that we can walk into about this movie is the expectations. And they were lofty. The expectations, they were the 1991 JFK. Oliver Stone was busy in the 90s. We have The Doors, JFK, same year. 93, Heaven and Earth. Heaven and Earth wrapped up his Vietnam trilogy. 94, Natural Born Killers. 95, Nixon. JFK hit the culture, solidified Kevin Costner's career in a way that few films do. Worthy of every single Oscar and every single category it was nominated for. Incredible score by John Williams. But Nixon was set up to be the Oscar-winning film that JFK was not. At least an Oscar for Anthony Hopkins. And what came about was confusion. Where are we with our nominations here? Let's see. Best Actor. Best Supporting Actress, Joan Allen. How does she not win? Best Original Screenplay. Best Original Score, John Williams, yet again. So he puts a little bit of the old band back together, and I'm watching this movie. And there's times where Oliver Stone, I don't know how they do it. It's so fantastic, but he ages the footage to make it look like it's a 18 millimeter newsreel. And he's whipping the camera and he's zooming it during some of these press conferences. And this is relatively the story of Richard Nixon through Watergate. And Oliver Stone, he struggles to tell us how Watergate and the fall of Richard Nixon separated the country and kind of some of the country came apart at its seams. What Oliver Stone fails to do is portray Richard Nixon as a heroic character, to portray him as a warrior in the arena. He victimizes him. And at this point, JFK had this other area that we can walk into is the significance of the JFK movie. And we have to compare the two. I hate doing it sometimes. JFK solidified itself in the American lexicon through conspiracy theorists. And at this point, Oliver Stone became a figurehead of truth and conspiracy theory and pointing out what's right, what's wrong, what people should know, what they shouldn't know. I mean, he was all over Sunday morning news programs, documentaries. I believe around JFK he produced 1 or 2 assassination documentaries. So all of that conspiracy stuff gets poured into Nixon. And that's kind of on the narrative level, as of we're following Richard Nixon. That's kind of where we lose a little bit of our connection to him as a character, because is he behind Bobby Kennedy? Is he colluding with J. Edgar Hoover? Conspiracy stuff, where a lot of these other things, and so much more of the Richard Nixon life is so much more giant and grand. And A.K. Patterson, I've read one of his biographies. Unbelievable. It really is. The Richard Nixon, any decent Richard Nixon, I mean, I remember reading Cheney's biography, and I think it was like chapter 2, just pulled me in, where we learned about his great-grandfather fighting in the Civil War, and it kind of goes into detail with some of that. And you just say to yourself, wow, there's a lineage of greatness here. Richard Nixon, the lineage of Richard Nixon's greatness is Richard Nixon. Everything he did in his life was just somehow giant, larger than life. And a lot of times, when we think of entertainers, when we think of athletes, we think of them on those terms, but not really politicians. As a life, Richard Nixon's life is second to none. He may have had the greatest life of an individual since Abraham Lincoln. And this movie, it takes liberty comparing Nixon to Abraham Lincoln in what they had to do to keep the country together. But we have 3 hours. I think this movie's 3 hours and 13 minutes. And we get the speech at the end, which is basically his resignation speech. And it's Richard Nixon talking to everyone about the type of man his father was. And then we get a couple end cards, title cards, that say, look, he did have peace. He held off Russia. His diplomacy was maybe the greatest ever. He held off the Vietnam War, and it's very positive. And I think some of that even comes off as disingenuous, because we want that to be in the movie. But what Oliver Stone does, and this is the final spot here, is Oliver Stone is so knee deep in the conspiracy stuff and the Nixon tapes and the Watergate stuff. He doesn't add enough of a perspective to it, and it's just Richard Nixon has 40,000 hours of recorded conversations, because Richard Nixon would record conversations in the White House. Something that we first time we heard of it, I'll say that. We all know if other presidents were doing it. And 60 minutes of it or something was released, and we have all these other thousands. So the insinuation there is that there's evidence somewhere that he killed Bobby Kennedy. There's evidence out there that he knows who killed the brother, John F. Kennedy. He's behind this. He's behind that. He's colluding with J. Edgar Hoover. And the conspiracy stuff is so heavy in this movie, I think it makes the movie feel unserious. even though the tone that Oliver Stone nails in this movie is second to none, where Richard Nixon is a fighter, he's unlucky, he's pressured, he's somewhat of a dog that doesn't let go of the bumper. Nixon is the warrior. He really is. And there's plenty of Richard Nixon. I mean, like, I remember one of his biographies. He was somewhat of a investor. He would always try and invest in schemes and things like that. And his father is very much like that. But what we get is the tuberculosis and the pain of the family, and somewhat Oliver Stone's the editing that he kind of came up through, the editing style of Natural Born Killers that really hit the peak in Any Given Sunday. We see some of it here, and some of that doesn't quite work, where Nixon is drunk and drinking and paranoid, and he sees his mother in his chair. All of this confuses the performance of Anthony Hopkins, but as a piece, and I always said this about that, I think this is the true walkaway of this movie, is Oliver Stone nails the feeling of this era, of the paranoia, of the desperation, of the we're teetering. Can I say that? We're about to tip over. That's what this movie hits home. It's not much of a biography, as the opening of the movie says, with the title cards. We create a lot of situations that we think may have happened because we don't have evidence of. And to me, that's honest. That's the right move, the way that this movie opens. Everything that comes after, though, we have to look at through the eye of entertainment, which is entertain me. And Oliver Stone knows he can't be 100% truthful because he's conspiracy ridden. He's he's got the tinfoil hat on, but boy, he nails the attitude of the era, and he makes you feel it. And he did something very similar, success-wise, that he did in The Doors, where The Doors is almost like there's a little bit of desperation there, but there's this height and exploration and the rise of The Doors and Jim Morrison becoming a part of the culture and the wildness of it all. I always felt like Oliver Stone should have made a Janis Joplin movie or a Jimi Hendrix movie when we go to real life figures. And what happens after this movie for Oliver Stone, it's he tries to bring it back. He tries to bring it back with Evita that he wrote, with U-Turn, with Any Given Sunday, and then it's back into the world-changing politics. Alexander, maybe his most underrated movie, and one of the most underrated movies of the 2000s. His final cut of Alexander is one of the best historical epics. But then we get World Trade Center. 2 years later, we get W. Tries to bring it back. Wall Street Never Sleeps. Money Never Sleeps. Which is somewhat political. It's so heavy with the environment. I mean, the opening scene with Shyla talking about the the water engines, and he's going to get the investors because they're going to make energy from ocean waves. But it's very heavy in the politics of the banks at the time. 2012, his last movie. Let's just say, the last movie without a little bit of political leaning. So it's a movie just to be a movie. Savages, 2012. Savages is great to watch with U-Turn. And then 2016, his last movie, Snowden. JFK really transformed Oliver Stone. The success of it and the attention he got from it. Now, since 2016, he's made a career out of what he did around JFK. the conspiracy, and we're living in an age where these conspiracy theories are coming true. You think he would be on the forefront of it, but he's an older guy now, so I'm sure he's got to rest. Nixon, aka Patters, for the 2026 President's Day. I do love, as much as I can be critical about this movie, I do love it. I love this movie so much.
Okay, that's a wrap.